May 29th, 1453, Constantinople. Before sunrise, the Ottoman army prepared for the final assault against the ancient city. Outside the massive Theodosian walls, thousands of soldiers waited beside enormous cannons. For weeks, Sultan Mehmed II had surrounded Constantinople with one goal: to capture the last great center of the Byzantine Empire. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI and his defenders prepared for a battle they knew could decide their future. The ancient walls had protected Constantinople for more than 1,000 years, but in 1453, powerful Ottoman artillery created damage that earlier armies could never achieve. As smoke covered the battlefield, the final chapter of the Byzantine Empire began. The Ottoman army continued its pressure on Constantinople as the damaged walls became harder to defend. Every day, new sections of the ancient fortifications required repairs. Inside the city, Byzantine workers carried stones and wooden supports through narrow streets to strengthen the weakest areas. Soldiers guarded the towers, while commanders searched for any possible advantage. Outside the walls, Sultan Mehmed II prepared a new strategy. The Ottoman forces had powerful cannons, a large army, and control of the land around the city. But one major obstacle remained: the Golden Horn Harbor. The defenders believed the harbor was protected by a massive chain. They thought no enemy fleet could enter. The Ottoman army continued its pressure on Constantinople as the damaged walls became harder to defend. Every day, new sections of the ancient fortifications required repairs. Inside the city, Byzantine workers carried stones and wooden supports through narrow streets to strengthen the weakest areas. Soldiers guarded the towers, while commanders searched for any possible advantage. Outside the walls, Sultan Mehmed II prepared a new strategy. The Ottoman forces had powerful cannons, a large army, and control of the land around the city. But one major obstacle remained: the Golden Horn Harbor. The defenders believed the harbor was protected by a massive chain. They thought no enemy fleet could enter. The massive chain across the Golden Horn had protected Constantinople for generations. Every previous enemy fleet had been forced to stop before reaching the harbor. Sultan Mehmed II knew that attacking the barrier directly would waste valuable time and thousands of soldiers. Instead, he gathered his most trusted engineers and commanders inside the Ottoman camp. Large maps of the city were spread across wooden tables. They carefully studied the hills behind the Genoese district of Galata. Soon, a daring idea began to take shape. Instead of sailing through the chain, the Ottoman fleet would travel across land. Workers quietly collected thousands of wooden logs, thick ropes, and barrels of animal fat to reduce friction. Every supply arrived after sunset to avoid attracting attention. While the Byzantine defenders watched the sea, the real operation was taking shape behind the hills. By the end of the night, the first transport route had been carefully marked. As darkness covered the hills outside Constantinople, the operation finally began. Hundreds of Ottoman workers lifted the first warships onto greased wooden tracks. Teams of oxen and soldiers pulled together while engineers guided every movement with ropes and wooden rollers. The work continued in complete silence except for whispered commands. Fires were carefully hidden behind the hills to avoid revealing the operation. By midnight, several ships had already crossed ground that no fleet had ever sailed before. At sunrise, Byzantine lookouts turned toward the Golden Horn and could hardly believe what they were seeing. Ottoman warships were now floating inside the protected harbor. The massive defensive chain had never been broken, yet it had been completely bypassed. Constantinople suddenly faced an attack from two directions, and the balance of the siege changed forever. The appearance of the Ottoman fleet inside the Golden Horn shocked everyone in Constantinople. For centuries, the city's greatest defense had been the massive iron chain guarding the harbor. Now, without breaking that chain, Mehmed II had placed his ships exactly where no enemy fleet had ever reached before. The Byzantine commanders rushed to reorganize their defenses, but every decision came too late. Soldiers who had been protecting the western walls were now forced to move toward the harbor. This weakened the city's main defensive line at the very moment the Ottoman army increased its attacks from the land. Inside the Ottoman camp, confidence grew rapidly. Engineers continued improving artillery positions, while commanders coordinated attacks from both directions. The siege was no longer a single battle against strong walls. It had become a carefully planned operation surrounding Constantinople from every side. Every passing hour reduced the defenders' chances of survival. The city's food supplies were running low, exhaustion spread among the soldiers, and hope slowly disappeared. Mehmed II understood that victory was no longer a question of possibility. It had become a matter of time. With Constantinople now threatened from both land and sea, the pressure on the Byzantine defenders became overwhelming. Every sunrise brought fresh attacks, forcing exhausted soldiers to rush from one section of the walls to another. The city's engineers worked without rest, filling damaged sections with stones, timber, and earth, only to see new cracks appear hours later. Inside the streets, citizens gathered food, carried supplies, and prayed in churches, hoping the city could survive one more day. Emperor Constantine XI refused every suggestion to abandon the capital. Instead, he walked along the walls, encouraging his men to remain firm, despite the growing danger. Across the battlefield, Mehmed II carefully observed every weakness through reports and detailed maps. Rather than launching reckless assaults, he patiently increased the pressure until the defenders became too exhausted to respond effectively. Each passing day widened the advantage of the Ottoman army. The siege was no longer decided by a single battle, but by endurance, planning, and constant pressure. Soon, the final assault would become unavoidable, bringing the centuries-old Byzantine Empire closer to its last decisive moment. On the morning of May 29th, 1453, the final Ottoman assault began. Wave after wave of soldiers advanced toward the battered walls of Constantinople. After weeks of relentless siege, the exhausted defenders could no longer hold every position. Emperor Constantine XI refused to leave his city. Instead, he chose to fight beside his soldiers until the very end. As the battle reached its climax, Ottoman forces finally broke through the defenses. Before long, their banners rose above the ancient walls that had protected Constantinople for more than 1,000 years. The fall of Constantinople marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, a civilization that had survived for over 11 centuries. For Sultan Mehmed II, it was the greatest victory of his life, earning him the title Mehmed the Conqueror. The city would soon become the capital of the Ottoman Empire and later grow into modern-day Istanbul, one of the world's most important cities. The Siege of 1453 changed the course of history forever. It reshaped trade routes, transformed the balance of power between Europe and Asia, and signaled the end of the medieval era for many historians. Even today, the story of Constantinople remains one of history's greatest examples of determination, innovation, leadership, and courage under impossible circumstances. More than 5 centuries later, the walls may stand in silence, but the events of 1453 continue to echo through history.